This video is the result of a collaboration with two of my knitting besties, Tom Swindler, the Sockinator, and Scarlet Royal, the Loom Muse. Scarlet designed this kind of heel for looms. She calls it the Dutch heel, and if you want to see her do it on another loom, that's on her channel. Tom wrote this pattern, and it's with gracious permission from both of them that I'm able to do the video for you on Kiss Looms. This is the toddler version of Tom's Rib Gusset sock, and I've already done the very top. My idea is I'll review this quickly with you so we can spend our real time and focus on that gusset flap for the heel, because that's the part you will be least familiar with. This began with 36 stitches cast on using the double E-wrap cast on. I'm going to just quickly review that for you on these empty pegs. My idea is that since they're sticking out and you don't have the confusion of two rows of pegs, it might be easier. Begins with a loop on one peg, E-wrap the next peg twice, lift the bottom loop over the top loop. And we did that all around the loom, of course, set up with 36 working pegs. If you have the option, as I do, of setting it up so that there's an opening in the middle because of these ends, that was a mess up. You didn't see that. That's the way to go, because having some opening in the middle makes it a lot easier to do the flap. It could be done on any setup that allows you to work in the round, but I strongly recommend using the end sets if you have them. By the way, this is an FG1. FG is both for fixed gauge and fine gauge in my mind. These are fine gauge socks. Tom wrote the pattern for 1/4 inch gauge looms, which is another way of describing loom size not used by Kiss, but it's based on peg distance. And I found the loom that matched his gauge best for Kisses was the FG1 for me. So that's the double E-wrap cast on. Remember, he refers to it as the fine gauge cast on, and it is a good one for fine gauge things. Now, I will be knitting back and forth here to show you how the first 4 rows went, but of course in reality we're knitting in the round. We just wrap as usual and then knit all of the bottoms over all of the tops. That's 4 plain knitting rows. Now you can see those 4 rows down here, and they're rolling. That's a little decorative edge. That's not an accident. Then we proceed to knit 2, purl 2, rib, and I'm already on the 19th row, which is our final row. Actually, rows 1 to 4 are knit, rows 5 to 19 are knit 2, purl 2, and that's where I am now. So in order to catch up to me, this is a purl stitch, as I've already knitted one around the corner from it. You'll go around like this until you have completed 19 rows. Of course, a cuff is a flexible thing. If you have a reason that you'd like it longer or shorter, feel free to knit more or fewer rows of the ribbing. This is purl 2. If you need help with the basics of a knit stitch or a purl stitch, or a more in-depth view of casting on, I have complete videos on all of those matters. That's why we're just doing a quick overview here. So I will get all the way around, finishing the 19th row of the pattern, and I'll know when I've finished because I always leave my yarn tail from my initial loop as a marker. So when I reach there, I'll be finished and we'll meet again. I am ready for my last 2 purl stitches. I just knitted 2 and we'll purl 2. And the coming heel flap is knitted on 18 of the 36 stitches. My ribbing is complete, and now it's time to start knitting the heel. I know where I started because I left the yarn tail. Therefore, this is peg 1, 2, 3, and on around to peg 18. And those are the only ones we will be working for a little while. Here's how each of the next few rows goes. Slip 1, that means just let the yarn pass behind it. Knit 17. You can continuously wrap if you want, but because I've got to turn my loom, I'm going to stop after this side is knitted and go ahead and knit over. And of course here I'm using the Classic Kiss U-wrap. It makes a totally normal knit stitch. Now that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. That's the last peg we knit for this row. Hook them all over, and then we will repeat going the other direction. This time slip 1 will function the same, but be a little different in that I don't really have to pass the yarn behind the peg. It's already sitting behind the peg. I just don't wrap that one. And I begin knitting on the second peg, which, counting the way I counted them before, is peg 17. So we will keep this up, going back and forth for rows 20 to 32. I'm using Patton's cotton stretch yarn, which is very nice, and it'll make good toddler socks. I want to remind you, if you are using a yarn like this one, not to overstretch it. Don't stretch it to the maximum point as you work. That'll mess with your gauge and make a hard fabric that doesn't take advantage of the stretchiness. So knit with a relaxed hand. Here I am finishing up row 13, hooking over. Oops, don't split stitches. And during this process, of course, a flap of knitting has formed where those stitches on these 18 pegs have been knitted for 13 rows while the others have not. And this is the result. Now I'm going to take a slight liberty with the pattern, and I'm going to knit back for the first 6 stitches, but still slipping 1, so we actually knit 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is going to put my yarn in the position that I need it to be in next. That added tiny amount of knitting won't really affect the size in any noticeable way, and it will allow us not to break the yarn. At this point, we need to put a few stitches on holders. I made one out of a paper clip, and we need 2, so I will make the other one with you watching. These are vinyl coated paper clips, which I find to be easier on the knitting, and they're very inexpensive. Okay, straighten it out more or less. I've pretty much decided how much of it I can afford to leave straight. And going by the first one, I'm doing that again. Let me get a measurement for you since you won't have one to go by. My bend started at about 3.5 centimeters or 1 1/4 inches. Now with the rest of this, we want to make a closure sort of like a safety pin. So bend it so it will cross the straight arm, and then bend it so it will enclose the straight arm. Now it does in fact work like a safety pin. If your hands have trouble with that final bend, just use pliers. I was able to do it on these with my fingertips, but if that gives you trouble for whatever reason, you do not have to. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches need to come off of the loom and on to the stitch holder. And I want to do them in this order because of the way in which they have to go back onto the loom eventually. So, lifting one off, putting it on the stitch holder, 2, 3, 4, 5, come on, number 5, and 6. If you're gentle, you won't lose any stitches for any reason, not from the loom, not from where you're transferring. Now it's time to put these 6 on the other holder. You don't always have to use a tool. I'm not sure I can get this done where you can see it, but we'll try. If I scoop up the stitch carefully right onto the holder, poke it into the stitch wherever you can get purchase, it can be a little bit faster. So do it whichever way works for you. That's 4. Ready for 5. And 6. Now we've got 6 on each holder. They're safe, and we're ready to move on to the next step, and we have 6 still working on the loom of the 18 that covered this area. For rows 33 to 45, we do what you're about to see over and over until all of these stitches are hung. Take the end stitch off of the holder. I just dropped one of these. You must guard against that, and I've got a little repair I'll need to do. I'll take care of that off camera. Right now that's protected. Take the end stitch off the holder and place it on the end peg that's still working. Don't add any pegs in, not at this point. Now slip 1, meaning don't knit the first peg. Knit 4. These are 4 normal knit stitches. The 5th stitch is a knit 2 together, which means you wrap it normally and you knit it normally. The only difference is, if you can see, there are already 2 strands of yarn on there because of us adding one from the holder. There we go. You may place the new stitch from the holder onto the peg either at the beginning or end of the row, as long as you knit them in the correct order. So I've been doing it at the beginning. That just suits my way of thinking better. But let's do it for you the other way in case you have trouble keeping that stitch in place. That's the downside of my method. So you could slip 1, which I did, this one, knit 4, now place the held stitch from the holder onto the peg, and then you won't have to keep it sitting there so long. Now there are still 2 stitches per peg on that one, therefore it's still a knit 2 together. And we're forming the shape of the heel in this manner. Slip 1, knit 4, Take one from this holder and place it on the peg and knit 2 together. I'm going to go off camera because I have a repair to make, and I will see you in a little bit. I'm back because I suddenly realized, you know, if I dropped a stitch, you might drop a stitch. Here's how I am going to fix it. I caught this one on the holder. It had laddered down 1 row. So I'm putting it on a peg and then finding the strand of yarn that was the stitch from the row above it, and I'm just going to re-knit it normally. Now I'll move this to the peg it belongs on for our knit 2 together, and we're back to normal, good as new. So should you drop something, which is, it could happen, don't panic, just catch it, fix the run, and move on. Now we'll slip this one. I'm going to return to putting the stitch on the end peg in advance of the row. There it is. So you know what's coming next. Knit 4. And then since I've already got these 2 on one peg, let me separate them so you can see it truly is 2. They've stacked up on each other. There you go. I can just keep wrapping, and as long as I knit both bottom loops over the top loop, I've still done a knit 2 together. We will continue with slip 1, knit 4, and knit 2 together, having hung 1 stitch on the end peg from the holder until all of the held stitches have been hung back and joined with the main work after row 45. We are going to continue in this exact same pattern until all of the loops or stitches, that is, that were held on the holders have been knitted off. Now we're ready to resume knitting in the round, but in order to do that, this length of knitting that was the result of knitting on the 18 pegs only has to be hung. And we use what looks like a chain up the edge. I'm going to admit something to you. I have already hung it and taken it off one time because I wanted these loops to stretch so you could see them better. Yours will look tighter, but this is what we're looking at. We hang a strand from the edge of each chain stitch, and there should be the correct number to fill 6 pegs. You will have to stretch a little more than you see me doing. But here it is getting tight for me down here. And the last one is white. I made note of that so it'd be easier to find. And now we'll be able to knit. On this one I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit so you get a different kind of view. Here's stitch number 3, 4, 5, 6. And now you can see we have continuous work around the loom. You can see the heel shape. It's all complete in there. It's time to resume knitting in the round. For row 46, we start right where we are. And the way the pattern reads, it's knit 6, knit 6, knit 18. I think the reason for that is just to make you aware of the fact that you're joining the work. You're resuming a normal situation. But this 6 are stitches that we just hung. The 6 to my right, leading up to where the yarn tail began, they're stitches that were already in work. And one of them is, for me, around the corner. It will depend on your setup. Now we'll wrap and knit the next 18 normally, and at that point we'll be ready to just resume totally normal tubular or circular knitting. And that will go on from rows 47 through 101. Keep in mind that if your row gauge varies slightly from the one in the pattern, you can shorten or lengthen, and of course, saying something's toddler sized doesn't necessarily mean that it's perfect for your toddler. I'm thinking of my own feet, which ended up size 6.5, and Shaquille O'Neal's feet that ended up, I think, size 15. What are the chances that when we were 18 months old, our feet were the same size? I think he might have needed a row or two more than I did. So that's something you can easily adjust. Check the length of your child's foot. If that's not possible for you to do, a parent can usually take a foot outline or even a footprint or a measurement from heel to toe to make sure that you end up getting socks that fit. All right, now here we go. We're beginning row 47 and knitting in the round. So let's all do that to the appropriate length. Again, the pattern says through row 101 total. Let me do the quick math and tell you how many rows you'll be knitting in the round. Looks like we will be knitting 55 rounds of just normal knit stitch all the way around the loom. I will see you when we're all there.